watching, it reminds me of the O.J. Simpson case, when you had huge battles between Johnnie Cochran, Robert Shapiro, F. Lee Bailey. There were so many big egos, and books were written. Defense attorney Eric Chase about how they struggled for power, and it was one of those sort of Al Haig situations where everybody would say, I'm in charge here. No, I'm in charge here.
Well, I don't know if this is so much about who's in charge. It's about the fact that Flanagan has actually been doing a very bad job in his cross-examination of the experts. He's been focusing on these very technical medical issues. And actually, I think that Chernoff, in his opening statement, set this up as not being about the standard of care. This is like a regular criminal case to Chernoff. Who's telling the truth? We have a great discrepancy in Dr. Murray's account and what this witness has just said. He's been able to tell from his analysis, from his test. Dr. Murray says he gave 0.25 milligrams of propofol to Michael Jackson. Dr. Schaefer came in and said there was a drip. It was at least 25 times what Dr. Murray says he gave. So this becomes a factual case and not a case about analyzing standard of care and medical issues. And that's why Chernoff stands.
So are we seeing a struggle in philosophy? Are we going to see less of Flanagan in that courtroom? Because the lead attorney is Chernoff, not Flanagan.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you are going to see Chernoff taking the lead. This case is set up as being about a factual dispute by the defense and not about standard of care. Now, the prosecution wants it to be about standard of care. They want to say whenever you give propofol, you don't leave the room. Dr. Schaefer testifies that there were at least 25 things that Dr. Murray did that were wrong, not the proper protocol with propofol. If the defense lets that be what this case is about, they will lose. And Chernoff knows that.
But let me say this. Mike Flanagan does have medical expertise, and to wade into a cross-examination of this a preeminent anesthesiologist, you almost need to be a doctor. I mean, a lot of this stuff has gone right over our heads, milligrams, milliliters, nanograms, and I'm not making that stuff up. Now, could Eric Chernoff get into trouble if he saunters in and thinks, I'm going to use my dominant personality to shoot this guy down, and he doesn't have the medical knowledge to do this kind of very in-depth, dense cross-examination at the 11th hour? Wouldn't you have to prepare for months to do a cross-examination like this?
Absolutely not. Us defense attorneys, we cross-examination experts all the time. And when we do that, we don't always have all the experience, whether it's psychological experts or medical experts. We can prepare for this stuff right away. Remember what I said and why Chernoff is stepping in. He's trying to make this not about the medical stuff. The important thing about Schaefer's testimony wasn't about the standard of care. The important thing about Schaefer's testimony was that Dr. Murray lied when he talked to the police. And that's what Chernoff has to attack, the lie.
How is it that without medical knowledge, you're going to be able to, are you going to be able to challenge mathematical formulas?
A defense attorney is able to prepare for this stuff very quickly, especially a talented defense attorney like Chernoff. The reality is Flanagan has done a terrible job. He's approached it from a medical standpoint. It's been dry. It's gone over the jury's head. He has not made points. He's appeared to have been bested by all of the prosecution's experts so far.
Feeling.
5 a.m.
That astounds me. It astounds me, Eric Chase, that not only are the stakes high here, but in some cases the jury sees things like these. And I know things get emotional at trial, but when you hear that kind of behavior, if in fact there were words said to people by Dr. Murray, if in fact what Paul White, Dr. White said some things, is this the way you normally see it, or is this team out of control? Is this whole group out of control?
This kind of thing happens a lot during trials, and it's important to for us to, I hope, find out what the jury has seen and hasn't seen. For juries, perception is everything. The perception, among other things, how the defense team perceives themselves to be doing. Do they think they're in trouble? If the jury thinks the defense team thinks they're in trouble, the jury's going to think they're in trouble. So if the jury heard Chernoff arguing with Dr. White, and it was heated, and he said, don't take things personally, and the jury heard that, they might think the defense team's got a problem.
Well, I'm standing up, or I mean, he's making waves in there. Why are they letting him sit there like that?
Well, it's actually very common to have opposing experts listen to each other's testimony in court, and they do that so they can directly address what the other expert has said when they testify. Now, how he's acting in court, that's a different issue. And if the jury perceives him as being unprofessional and doing things out of haste haste or out of emotion, they may give less credibility to his testimony.
But Dr. White is sitting directly behind the defense table, and he's passing notes to Murray. Have you ever seen that? Because I got to tell you, I haven't seen that. I've seen them in the gallery, but not right there. And some people are saying, wait, it almost looks like he's a part of the defense team.
I've done that myself. I've even had experts sit at the table, especially when you're dealing with highly technical issues. You need these experts to educate you. If Dr. Schaefer says something that you're not expecting about the mathematics, as you said, Jane, and how he was able to determine the amount of propofol in his system or in his stomach or whatever it was, they may need Dr. White to educate them on what questions to ask, and that happens a lot.
Now, here's like that somebody just might have overheard these comments. Could he have violated the gag order?
If he did it with the intent of communicating it to the press or the public or even potentially jurors, then of course he violated the gag order. But I want to make this point, Jane. This actually plays into the defense hands. This has been a landslide against Dr. Murray. And I've had cases like this where what you're really trying to do is get a stick and throw it into the spokes of the bicycle as it's careening down the hill. And for the jurors, if they perceive something else is going on here, look, I think this jury wants to acquit Dr. Murray. He's an African-American who has risen to the top of his profession. Among other things, he certainly did not have criminal intent.
They want to?
Yes.
Really? Even though they've heard about the standard of care issues, failing that 17 different times, you think the jury is feeling like they want a reason to let Dr. Murray go?
Absolutely, and I've seen the situation on many occasions. When you have a sympathetic defendant, a man who clearly does not have the kind of criminal intent that somebody has when they rob a bank or sell drugs or point a gun or shoot somebody, he is not a criminal in the classic sense of how we see criminals. And so they're looking for a reason, I believe, to acquit him and let him get on with his life. And I've heard jurors say that in the past. Now, I'm not saying it's going to happen, because I think the evidence has been very strong against him, but I do think they walk into a case like this looking to acquit a person who they see as a good man.
I don't know how...
Eric, it involved the fact that initially, if we come back to the camera, the prosecution anesthesiologist had the propofol here, and actually the prosecution has contended that the propofol bottle was in a cut open saline bag. So take it from there, Eric.
Well, actually, I think what's important about this is credibility. Juries hold prosecutors to a higher level of credibility than they hold defense attorneys. They are agents of the government. We expect them to tell the truth and be honest at all times. If this was an honest mistake, it's one thing. If they intentionally tried to mislead the jury, and that's what the jury believes, then the prosecution could really be hurt by it. And a lot depends on exactly what the stipulation was and how it was read to the jury. But if the jury was told...
Well, we don't even know about a stipulation. Let's tell them about the stipulation.
Well, there was apparently a stipulation that the prosecution had misrepresented how the propofol was hanging on the stand. And if that misrepresentation was intentional, and a lot depends also on how Dr. Schaefer integrated that into his own testimony. If he accepts it and testifies about how the propofol was administered while alluding to and referencing a mistaken arrangement of the propofol on the stand, he loses his credibility. I see why Chernoff is stepping in here. This is a war. It's gotten ugly. It's getting bloody. And it's time for someone to come in and take the hill. And that's what Chernoff's going to try and do this afternoon, and it's going to be great.
Watching that mechanism was what led to Michael Jackson's death.
Well, how important it is depends on perception. Like I said, it's a mistake, and it's going to be up to Chernoff to make it a big mistake, an intentional mistake, that these people are intentionally trying to railroad Dr. Murray by misrepresenting the evidence. The defense attorney's job here is to manage perceptions, manage the facts, and how the facts are being delivered, just like how the propofol is being delivered.
But here's the ironic part of it all. It's actually more medically sound to have the separate propofol hanging the way it was demonstrated initially. This is a horribly jerry-rigged system. To slice open a saline bag and then to stick a bottle of propofol inside it. We had an anesthesiologist sitting right where you were who said that's horribly unsanitary. That means that somebody got their dirty hands all over this bottle, and they were aghast at the idea of such a jerry-rigged system. So actually, it was almost like the prosecution anesthesiologist was doing a favor initially by making it a little bit prettier than it actually was.
It may be medically more sound to do it that way, but it's legally more sound to be able to manage the perception and paint both the prosecutor and the prosecution's expert as being intentionally misleading to the jury. And that's Chernoff's job this afternoon. It's got less to do with the medical, how things were rigged and how they were hanging, than how the witnesses and the prosecution are being perceived by the jury. Are they honest, doing this because they feel it's their moral and civic duty, or are they trying to make names for themselves and railroad Dr. Murray?
And was, dare I say, a little nasty toward her.
You've got to be nasty in a case like this. You've got to be.
But could that backfire? You know, because you take on somebody like that. And remember, Dr. Schaefer is a doctor. He is there offering his opinion. He's not trying to, or at least the prosecution wants you to believe, he doesn't have an axe to grind. Is it sometimes a bad sign if you aggressively take on a witness who is just trying to give this kind of medical testimony?
As you said, as the prosecution is trying to get us to believe, it's Chernoff's job to change that perception. Your perception right now, well, you just told us about why Dr. Schaefer is there. That's why Chernoff is stepping in. Look, I watched Flanagan cross-examine another expert. He did a horrible job. It was exceptionally dry. It was focusing on technicalities of milligrams and comparisons and absorption rates. And I didn't understand it. I know the jury didn't understand it.
And not only that, he let him run on and on and on. In the case of Dr. Steinberg, some of his best points were made on cross-examination.
Absolutely. And good experts always do that to us defense attorneys. And we got to watch for it. And we've got to cut them off. And we've got to let the jury know that they're being non-responsive to our questions, and that they've got to answer our questions. Chernoff had to step in. This is it. It's fourth and goal.
And Eric, I have to ask you, you're mentioning how this is an issue of perception, but on cross-examination, I have to think you have to do something about the fact that he's not only saying he failed the standard of care in multiple ways, but also that's how Michael Jackson died. And it was at Dr. Murray's hands.
I actually don't think he's going to be attacking the standard of care as much as he's going to be attacking the factual stuff.
Okay.
And the opinion stuff. And I was actually a little offended when the expert said that Dr. Murray is responsible for every drop of propofol and lorazepam in the room. That's an opinion. And if I'm sitting on the jury, I'm thinking to myself, that's for us to decide. It's for us to decide who's responsible for how this happened. Tell me about the facts. Don't tell me what it means. And it actually doesn't help the jury to decide the case, to say that as a doctor, you're responsible for everything. If Michael had reached over and grabbed an injection and injected himself with a propofol, then certainly Michael Jackson's responsible for doing that.
Eric, the prosecution anesthesiologist testified that Michael Jackson could have injected himself 6 times, one time after the other over a course of a couple of hours, and still, according to the science, there's more propofol in his system than he would have been able to inject. The only explanation I think they can fall back on, since they've already shown you can't kill yourself by drinking it, is that Michael Jackson woke up and moved this little lever and infused himself with the propofol. Now, that gets back to your point of the prosecution saying Dr. Conrad Murray is responsible for every single drop of propofol, even if, presumably, Michael Jackson did this. However, I am led to believe that in the jury instructions, there will be some kind of instruction about an intervening act. And the only way that the standard of care issues can be sidestepped by the defense is if they can establish that there was an intervening act. Would Michael Jackson turning on that lever himself be that intervening act?
Oh, absolutely. And what I see here is I see a prosecution that is, in fact, overreaching. This case is not going to be decided on the he's responsible for every drop. It's going to be decided on who administered the propofol.
Yeah,
and that's the way that the defense set it up straight from opening statement. And so when the prosecution or the expert on their own goes out and testifies as to these things they didn't really have to do, it plays right into the defense hand.
But himself, the doctor was still reckless, and it's still involuntary manslaughter.
You know, that may be true, but a trial like this is as much about defining the question as it is about giving the answer. And what the defense has tried to do from the very beginning of this case is define the question as who administered the propofol, and get away from all this complicated medical stuff. Who administered the propofol? And if the prosecution engages that, which they have, engages that question, then it's the answer to that question that will instruct the jury's decision.
Dr. Murray's still guilty of involuntary manslaughter because he slipped below the standard of care and that his reckless conduct created the situation that caused his death.
From a technical standpoint, yes, he is.
So if that's in the jury instructions,
But
isn't
what
that an
about
open
the
and shut
intervening
case?
act?
But the question becomes, how have the attorneys, both the prosecution and the defense, defined the issues for the jury to decide?
That means it's all about the jury instructions, as
It's
we're
about the
talking
jury
about right
instructions, and it's about perception of what the question to be answered is.
here. White is the first to take the stand to try to blunt Schaefer's testimony?
If I was the defense attorney in this case, I probably would put Dr. White up first. Then the case almost becomes about this battle of the experts. And as we've seen in so many cases, battles of the experts get muddy, and it's very easy for the jury to throw up their hands and say, we can't tell who's telling the truth. You got one guy on one side, one guy on the other side.
Eric?
And so if they set it up that way, and if they're able to frame the question that way, they've done their job and they can win this thing.